Welcome back. Now I had intended in this video to launch right into cutting the dados, but I got a little behind on making these panels. These are really big and it's been kind of time consuming, but that's okay because it's going to give me an opportunity to show you something kind of interesting. Now, the panel sides for the tall bookcase, pretty big. They're going to wind up being 78 inches tall and about 14 3/4 inches wide. So for this side panel, I had originally picked these two pieces of wood. But after I got it all planed down, leveled out, jointed and everything, I looked at it and I just really didn't like the way these two boards looked side by side together. No matter how I flipped them around, there's just a little bit of color difference that was kind of throwing me off. But then when I started looking at this board really close, I noticed that there's some cracking pretty much right along the center of the board from about right here down to about right here. I don't know if this is too close to the center of the tree or what happened, but there is some definite cracking there and I just don't like it. So what I've decided to do is I'm going to rip off two pieces, one off this side and one off this side, move them over and glue them onto this panel. Take a little bit more work, it'll be 3 pieces instead of 2, but I think the contrast of this color of wood with this color of maple is going to look really nice and it's going to get rid of this problem right here. So let's get to work, rip this down and make this panel. Wow, that came out really good, and I think I'm going to really like this sort of slightly darker two boards framing this beautiful pinkish cast board in the middle. This is going to be really, really nice. Let's glue this up now. Well, here are the two sides of the taller of the two bookcases we're building in this project. And these really are big pieces. They didn't look this big when I sketched it out. Anyway, they came out, I think, gorgeous. When we get a little finish on here and start to pop this grain out on the maple, these are just going to be stunning. Working on a big project like this in a relatively small shop is really a challenge. I haven't made it any easier on myself because in some instances I've been ripping some boards and actually gluing together 3 pieces to make a panel instead of the 2 pieces I had originally planned. But I wanted to get the grain looking really nice because I think this is going to wind up with kind of a clear finish on it. And I want the grain to pop. I want it to match. I want it to look really good when it's done. So what I've had to do is kind of work out a little bit of a system to get this done. And you'll need to do the same thing if you're building a big project in a small shop. The key is to batch operations. Just can't go back and forth when you don't have a lot of room to work. You just need to do one operation at a time. So I decided that before I started cutting these to their final size, or cutting dados, I really needed to get all 14 panels glued up and ready to go. And that's right, it's 14 panels and each one of them is fairly massive. There's 4 sides, 2 tops, 2 bottoms, and 6 intermediate shelves between these 2 bookshelf units. So a lot of preparatory work. Now the way I'm batching these and doing this the most time efficient way is to prep 2 panels at a time and then glue 1 panel up, and when it's done I can glue up the next one. I've only got this one space here in my shop big enough that's a flat space where I can glue up a panel this size. And even if I had more space I probably wouldn't have enough clamps. So I'm doing 1 glue up. These boards are ready to go. And here's how I'm going at it. First of all, I get the boards out for 2 panels and I flip, mix, match, line up the grain, get it looking like I want. In a couple of instances, I've ripped pieces down and mixed and matched the pieces to get them the way I want them to be. Then I line them up, temporarily clamp them together, and mark the locations where I'm going to cut the Festool domino mortise slots. Then I cut all the mortise slots for both panels. After that's done, I can set the boards aside for the next panel. I can get my clamps out, line them up here on the work surface, and I can glue up 1 panel. Now this panel takes optimally about 4 hours to dry. And when I say optimally, that's what I've found where it's really safe at that point to remove the panel from the clamps, but the glue that's squeezed out on the back side of the panel is not so rock hard that it's still fairly easy to remove. Now I just use a basic scraper to scrape off the bigger globs of glue, and then I take a cabinet scraper and go down the seams and get the last little bits of glue out. Works really great. I set that panel aside and glue up the next panel. 4 hours or so later, when that's done, I can take it out, remove the clamps, set them to the side, and I take the 2 finished panels and I rough sand them. I'm just using 80 grit sandpaper, and I'm getting off the pencil marks, the chalk, and any last little remnants of glue that might be hanging in there, and getting them nice and smooth. When I'm done with that, I can then take those 2 panels and set them way off to the side, out of the way, and I can prep and glue up 2 more panels. Same process. It's slow, it's a little bit tedious, but once all the panels are done, then we'll be able to move through the project pretty rapidly. When it comes time to cut them to their final size, really want to do them all at once. Once the table saw is set to cut these panels to the exact width, run them all through, they'll be identical. And then when I cut them to length, I can actually pair them and cut them together. Then when it's time to cut the dados, same thing, clear everything out, set up to cut the dados, and do all of that at one time. So the key to working on big projects in a small shop is to batch the operations and don't go back and forth. If I was to glue up a panel, cut it to its final size, then set it aside, I might not get every panel exactly the same size. And I would have to reset up the table saw every time. So want to do everything in batches, easier to move through that way. Now I want to show you a few little detail things that might come in handy if you're ever working on a project like that.
And I'm almost finished. I've got a few more panels to do, but I think we're about to run out of time in this video. So to show you a couple of more things, and then in the next video, I promise we're going to cut these down to their final size, and we're going to cut the dados. At that point, then I have to figure out where in the heck I'm going to glue these big bookcases up. Let's talk for a minute about removing that pesky glue squeeze out when you glue together panels. Now, obviously, on these panels on the top, which is what I'm calling the show face, I'm able to wipe the glue off with a paper towel and then come back with just a slightly damp paper towel and really scrub it and get the rest of the glue off, and that works fine. But there's glue squeezed out on the underside where I can't get to it. And let's face it, on a set of bookshelves, for instance, the sides of the bookshelf, obviously the outside of the sides you'll see all of the time, and I'm calling that the show face because that really needs to be perfect. But the reality is when you go to get something or place something on the shelves, you can see the inside of the sides as well. So both sides need to look really good, and that means that when I get this out of the clamps and turn it over, I need to get all of that glue squeeze out off those boards and make those seams look nice. So what I start with is this fancy little tool here. It's probably a couple of bucks at a big box store. I bought this years and years ago. It's a paint scraper. That's all it is. It has a blade. It actually has a screw here where you can turn this blade. I never have. My only maintenance on this is just to keep it clean, and every once in a while I'll give a couple of whacks with a piece of old sandpaper just to clean any corrosion off of it, and that's it. Now, when I first got it, the only thing I did was I took a file and I just nicked off the corners. And that's so that I don't accidentally gouge the wood or leave any lines on it. So all you got to do is just take this and rub it along the seam, and those big globs of glue will pop right off. Now, there is a variation of this that you can purchase that costs more money. It's a triangular file, or triangular scraper, and it works pretty good. I like it all right, but most of the time I just go to my old standby and use that. Now, after the big globs are off, I use a cabinet scraper. And this is probably one of the simplest, best, and most underutilized tools in all of woodworking. And I don't know why more woodworkers don't use this, but I suspect there's a little intimidation factor over sharpening this. And the interesting thing is, I think I'll make a video about how to sharpen one of these, and it'll probably be about 2 minutes long. It's that easy. In fact, this is the easiest tool you'll ever sharpen. And to use it, all you got to do is just give it a slight bend, press it down, and slide it across the board. Now, we're going to do this to remove the glue that's in the seam between the boards. So I've put a hook angle of about 10 degrees on this particular scraper. So it's a little bit more aggressive than what I would normally use on a piece of wood just for finishing purposes. But I want to show you how this works and how great it is. You've got to get cabinet scrapers and make them part of your repertoire in woodworking. You'll thank me for it. All right, so now I've got the panel pushed up against the fence of my table saw, which is locked down, and that's going to keep the panel from moving. And I'm going to take my old paint scraper here and just scrape off those big chunks. And you can see that's coming off pretty good. But of course, this paint scraper is not going to get it all. It's just going to get the worst of it. And then we're going to come back with the cabinet scraper. And what you want to do, I put 2 fingers behind, 2 thumbs, and flex it just a little bit, and then just scrape. And when the card scraper is properly sharpened, you'll actually get little curls.
and not just dust. In fact, when you start getting just dust, that's probably time to touch up, sharpen your scraper. But look at that. That seam is perfectly clean. Now I like to kind of come out on either side just to make sure I'm getting everything nice and smooth. But look at that. It's beautiful. And that's way better than spending an hour with a sander. That's nice. All right, another thing that I wanted to share with you was just a couple little hints here about gluing up a 3-piece top that actually will make it a lot easier. You want to get your glue on there. Okay. Now these mortise slots for the dominoes are pretty tight, which is what you want because you're really looking for the top to bottom registration. It's going to keep our show faces perfectly flat. And you need to tap these down. But what you want to do is tap them in such a way that they stay pretty much in the center of the mortise slot. That way you got a little wiggle room if you need to move the board side to side. After you get those tapped in, just make sure you got your orientation correct. Set this on top. Get it lined up and just knock it home slightly. Doesn't have to be all the way. Okay? Then it's easy to go ahead and do your second join. Let's spread that out. Make sure you get all the edge covered. Now we could lift this up and stack it on top like we did the first one, but it's easier to just put the dominoes in place and then lay the panel down and let the clamps squeeze the whole thing together. Okay, same thing, I'm going to tap these in and center them as best I can in these slots. And then we should be able to lay this down, and if the clamps are set correctly, I should have room. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so I'll just match this up. And now all we got to do is tighten our clamp in the middle, and we'll just pull the panel right together. Alright, now as we're pulling it together, I'm seeing that this is just a smidge out of line. So before I tighten it up, take a rubber mallet and tap it right into place. And there we go. Perfect. And that's all there is to it. Finally, all of these panels are now glued up and ready for the next phase of the project. It's amazing to me that I can typically estimate the amount of lumber I'm going to need very, very accurately,
but somehow I can underestimate how long it's going to take to do something by a very wide margin. Oh well. This has been really quite the process and quite the learning experience to do something of this size in my rather small shop. Okay, so the next step, obviously I haven't paid a lot of attention to the lengths of these boards other than just to make sure that the panel itself is plenty long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim off one end of all these panels and get a nice square end. Unfortunately, these are too wide to fit in my miter saw, so we're going to do something a little bit different to get those done. Then we need to trim them to their final width. And I'm going to use a combination of the Festool track saw and my table saw to get that done. Once that's done, I can then trim the other end of the panel and get it to its final finished length. Then finally, I can start with the dados. And I'm really looking forward to that because that's when we'll really start to be able to cobble these two bookshelves together and get an idea of what they're going to look like. We also got to deal with the potential for sagging on these big long shelves, and I've got a little trick for that I think you'll enjoy seeing. So be sure and come back for the next video, and I really appreciate you watching this one. See you soon.